Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 19th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item I want to call for a vote on this evening is the adoption of the minutes of the meeting held October the 5th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favour? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. You have the agenda before you. The next item on tonight's agenda is the approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have a mover and a seconder for tonight's agenda? Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Greer. All those in favour? Thank you. That is carried. We have one delegation tonight, and I want to thank you for coming on this evening. I'm delighted to introduce you to Julie Pisani. Julie is the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program Coordinator for the Regional District of Nanaimo, and I've listened to her presentations many times at the Sustainability Select Committee. We're delighted you're here. Thank you for coming. You're on first, and tonight you can have a little more than 10 minutes because there's nobody else, so I'm sure that everybody's interested in what you have to say, especially after this long, hot summer. So the floor is yours, Julie. Make yourself at home.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lefebvre, for inviting me to present to Council today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the program that I coordinate at the Regional District of Nanaimo, it's the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program. What it is actually it's a regional service that's paid into by the 4 municipalities as well as the electoral areas within the Regional District of Nanaimo, with the mandate, as I described, being threefold. So first of all, it's education and awareness, raising awareness and providing education for residents around water resources in the region. So where does our drinking water come from? What can we do to protect and conserve it? And it's not limited just to drinking water, but also the concept of watersheds and the ecology. That's part of it. So education and awareness. Second part of the program is around data collection, the science and monitoring. So learning more about our water resources within the region to better enable us to make decisions. So having local information on surface water and groundwater, and having that local information to move into the third fold, which is policy and planning. So the idea is with raised awareness, more education in the communities, with better local data about our water resources, that we can then influence and have a sound sort of knowledge base for decisions within our region, understanding our water resources. So with that context, today I'm going to be talking about rainwater harvesting. First little intro. So why am I talking about rainwater harvesting here today? A little bit of an intro from the mayor, suggesting that, of course, this past summer and the drought that we experienced maybe has brought kind of innovations and ideas like this to the forefront of people's minds. But essentially, there's some basics behind it. Why rainwater harvesting? Well, on eastern Vancouver Island, we get limited rainfall in the summer months. So we can go, as we saw this past summer, about 4 months without any significant rainfall. But we do get lots of rain during the winter months. So it's this distribution of rainfall throughout the year. It's disproportionately more in the winter months, as we know, with long periods without rain in the summer. So the next point then is it's not a lack of rain, but it's more a lack of storage and timing. So I've talked about timing in terms of the distribution of when we get our rainfall. But lack of storage comes back to a few things. So how is water stored in our region? Well, of course, there's the snowpack. That's a really important one, and a form of storage that's going to be impacted as we see these higher temperatures coming through our winter periods, with more precipitation coming as rain rather than snow. And this important storage unit of the snowpack at the upper elevations, say on Mount Arrowsmith, that's an important storage unit that we're seeing can be unpredictable. So that's one impact on storage. Another place we store water is, of course, in the Arrowsmith Lake, so the dam that's constructed at the headwaters of the Englishman River, storing that water specifically for drinking water purposes for the City of Parksville and Newts, also for fish flows in the Englishman River during the summer months. And thirdly, storage, we can talk about groundwater. So City of Parksville is on groundwater year-round, supplemented by Englishman River water in the summer months. But year-round, we rely on our aquifers that are storing infiltrated rainwater that's become groundwater to service our community. So when we're talking about changing climate and unpredictability, one thing is talking about groundwater recharge. And if we're not seeing that water infiltrating and to be stored within our aquifers, then that's one more impact on storage. So the next point I'll make kind of links in is that drier summers mean more stress on municipal water systems, local rivers, and aquifers. So if we're not getting the snowpack, we're not getting the rain that we need at the time that we need it, then that means lower river levels, which impact not only drinking water, but also the recharge to the ground, because there's that interface between surface water and groundwater. So groundwater comes up and fills our rivers in some respects, and at the same time, river water can serve to infiltrate the groundwater. So there's that interface there. So when we're not getting the rain and the precipitation that we need, that's impacting not only our surface water, but also our groundwater. And then I'm going to kind of link into, well, why particularly are we talking about rainwater in the context of storage and having enough water for our communities? Well, the rain is free, and storing it makes you resilient to drought. So that's kind of the point that I will be talking about in the presentation here. So a quick overview, what is rainwater harvesting? Now I've picked this image because this is the most applicable to our communities. But rainwater harvesting is essentially providing a means to capture and store rainwater for use at another time. And this works well within our setting here in Eastern Vancouver Island, because as I mentioned, the distribution of rainfall is during the winter months and not so much in the summer. So this provides the ability to, when it is raining, use the surface area of your roof. Now, some systems you can use other surfaces, but the most commonly used surface area would be a roof of a residence or another building, and then equipping it with gutters and transport piping to actually collect the water that lands on the roof area and convey it to a storage unit, such as the tank or cistern that's pictured there. And there's other key components to a system. I won't be getting too much into the technicalities, but essentially you want to have some form of debris removal so that you're getting a lot of that coarse material, such as leaves and needles. You're getting that out prior to it entering the tank, and that way you have this clean as possible water that's entering your tank. Makes it easy for maintenance purposes, and also, of course, for the health of the water, depending on its end use. Now, this also shows drainage away from the house foundation, so that makes sense in that we can't necessarily be collecting rainwater all year round. You'd have to have a pretty giant storage tank to pull that off. So essentially what we're seeing with the systems in our area is that you have the valve open to just drain to normal storm drain patterns for the majority of the winter, but then you switch the valve to convey water from your roof to the tank more in the shoulder season, so talking around March, when you would actually start diverting that water to be stored for the summer period. Again, it depends on how much storage you have, but that's essentially what we see. And then you see, so not only is there this choice to divert it away from the tank, there's also an overflow should the tank get full. And then the other outlet there is to distribute that stored, that collected water to its end use, which largely would be an irrigation system, hand watering for outdoor plants. And in less common situations, but they do exist, especially in rural areas in the Gulf Islands, sometimes that rainwater can be plumbed indoors for toilet flushing, or in some cases even potable water. But that's less applicable to sort of the urban setting here in City of Parksville. So we'll be talking more about outdoor water use and the purpose of rainwater for that. So that kind of gives an overview of what a typical rainwater harvesting setup would look like. So I want to just highlight some of the benefits here. So by collecting and storing rainwater, an individual or a residence can actually decrease their peak water demand on the municipal system. So we see our peak water demand in the municipal system come during the summer months when folks are washing their cars, watering their gardens. There's this spike in water use that correlates with a decrease in actual water availability and rainfall. And so by having this stored water on site at a residence, that is in its small part, and collectively, if more and more people are doing that, that would decrease the demand, the peak demand on the municipal system at the time when it's most stressed. So when you think about a municipal water system, it's sized for the peak day. So the size of the pipes, the size of the storage infrastructure, it's sized for that peak day in July when everyone's watering their gardens, they're washing their cars and that sort of thing. Not in level 4 watering restrictions, but it's sized for that peak day. And so by storing and collecting rainwater, that can decrease the peak, which actually means more longevity out of our existing infrastructure. An additional benefit is the protection of groundwater and river water when it's most stressed. So that comes back to before when I was mentioning the connection between river water and groundwater. So City of Parksville is on groundwater year-round from community wells. So picture during the summer when groundwater levels are already low because we haven't had that recharge for several months, and again, coupled with the demand on that resource, groundwater levels are decreasing, but at the same time, the river needs that input to keep the river flowing for fish. And so some people often say, it doesn't necessarily pertain to the Englishman because there's storage up at the Arrowsmith Dam, but sometimes when you see creeks and streams, they're still running during the summer. That's because there's groundwater input that's coming to the surface and making those streams run year-round, even if we haven't had rain for several months. Now, on the Englishman, like I said, there's releases. There's storage in the dam that's specifically released for fish, so the Englishman can keep running year-round. But groundwater is an important contribution to the flow of the Englishman River. And so if we can come back to decreasing our demand on both river water and groundwater during this peak period when it's the most dry and the most strained, then that can actually, take some of the pressure off of our local water resources. Now, an additional benefit, maybe moving more towards from the residents' perspective, the first two are definitely from the residents' perspective as well, but when you look at it this way, city watering restrictions do not apply if you're not using city water. And so if you are using collected rainwater, you can go about watering on your own schedule. It's not enforced the same way that city water is in terms of watering restrictions. So that's something that people can think about. If they do have a certain area of lawn that they want to keep green, it's near and dear to their hearts, well, maybe they won't be able to do that in a level 4. They won't be able to do that in a level 4 watering restriction. But what's one way around that? Well, potentially collecting rainwater to do that job is one solution. I would go further and say that, changing our landscapes to be less thirsty would be another avenue to take. But again, that's up for a personal decision, personal discretion. The last point I have is saving money on your water bill. Now, of course, this comes with a caveat because there's the capital costs of installing the rainwater system. But eventually, over time, if you're less reliant on that city water, then potentially that might be one benefit. But of course, there are caveats involved with that as well. A couple more. So in terms of, does your garden like it? Well, yes, it does. Rainwater is more of an ambient temperature rather than the cold water that's being distributed by the city. And it's chlorine-free, even though there's just minimal chlorine used within our water distribution system. Plants do love rainwater for those two reasons. Another additional reason is that, or another additional benefit, is that collecting rainwater can be used more in a stormwater management perspective as well. So the first few benefits I've talked about are around water availability and having a resilient supply of water. But an additional benefit is that during heavy rain periods, you can actually have this sort of intermediary slowing unit for that rainwater. So the picture I have up here is just a downspout just gushing. The roof water is going straight into the municipal storm infrastructure. But if you had a tank as an intermediary place between your roof and the storm drain, that would serve to slow that water down. And some people do have an actual drip trickle filter during the winter months so that they can't store all that rain because there's so much of it, but it's a way to slow it down and be less of a flooding hazard in our streams that are having all the stormwater conveyed into them. So minimizing erosion potential and that sort of thing. So there's a stormwater management benefit to rainwater collection as well. I just throw this chart up here. I know, it's not too big a deal to see the numbers on there. It's more the lines and what that's showing. So in the bars, that's showing when we get our rainfall, and the blue line is showing our water demand. So this just reinforces that concept I was speaking about earlier, which shows the distribution of our rainfall compared with when our community is demanding that water. And so I've circled collect water here, so that's during the winter months. And notice that I point to the winter and the shoulder season at the early spring, because again, your storage tank can only hold so much. You'd have to have a pretty massive storage tank to collect all the way from November to March consecutively. So generally, people will start diverting water to their tanks, say February, March, depending on how much storage, potentially even April. and then they would be using the water during the dry months, of course. So that's a good way to kind of show the distribution. Sometimes we've had questions from the public, why are we collecting rainwater? It doesn't rain in the summer. And I say, exactly, that's exactly why we're collecting rainwater. We're collecting it when we have rain and storing it for when we don't have rain. So making that connection is really important. So I just wanted to profile two different types of storage. So I profile here your typical rain barrel, which is, generally speaking, if you go into Buckerfields or Home Depot, generally you'll see 55-gallon or 50-gallon tanks. So the whole gallons and liters things is a bit of a headache, so I've included 208 liters there as well for the conversion. And just to give you a sense of size, the typical 55-gallon tank is essentially about 2 feet in diameter. And that is important because it can fit on smaller lots. They're relatively inexpensive, so ranging from about $80 up to, say, $120, depending on the different models with the different specifications. But generally speaking, this is an important point. A full barrel, a rain barrel, so I'm talking 55 gallons here, waters about 200 square feet of garden just one time. Now this is, of course, up for discussion because what plants are you growing, what type of soil do you have, that sort of thing. How much sun is that area getting? So it's kind of a very general calculation, of course, but it just gives you an idea that, this rain barrel can fill up, but it'll essentially provide you with one watering. Another stat that helps to illuminate that is that 1/4 inch of rain, so just over 6 millimeters of rain, on a typical roof would fill this barrel. And now I'm going to talk about cisterns to kind of compare and contrast. And just to give you an idea in terms of inches of or millimeters of rain that we received this year, in May it was the driest May we've seen in 30 years, and there was about 3 millimeters of water that month. And compared with, you'd need just over 6 millimeters to fill a barrel like that. But then you can look into, say, in April where we had around 42 millimeters of rain. So that, of course, would be full in that at that time. However, it would get used up relatively quickly. So now I'll compare and contrast with cisterns. So typically, a cistern is 1,000 imperial gallons or 1,000 gallons and up. You can find cisterns that are 500 or 200, but for the definition that I'm using today, it's typically 1,000 gallons and up. It's a larger footprint, so quite a bit bigger in size, with about 5 feet or more of diameter, and they can be 6 to 7 feet tall, sometimes even taller depending on the size you're putting in. That's generally the spec. And so that means you're going to need more space to install something like this. So rural properties, it's not as much of an issue. This starts to become an issue on smaller city lots where you have tighter space between fence lines and proximity to your neighbors, and overall just less space to work with. It is more costly as well. So you're looking at 75 cents to $1 per gallon. So a 1,000-gallon cistern, roughly $1,000. There is a cost efficiency when you get up to a 2,500-gallon tank where it can be only $1,900. So that's kind of the price range. But the advantage, of course, is lots more storage, means you can harvest more water, and it will last you longer through the drought, through the dry period. So I contrast with, you need 2 inches of rain, so about just over 50 millimeters of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof to fill that tank up. So that just kind of compare and contrast the different volumes. And there's benefits to your rain barrel, size, price, but the benefits to having a cistern is, of course, more storage the better, more resilient you will be, more water saved up when you have dry periods that you need to get through. So I will highlight the fact that the RDN does have a region-wide rebate program for cisterns. It's been offered across the region since 2012. We do stipulate that the cistern has to be 1,000 imperial gallons as a minimum, has to be CSA NSF approved, rated for potable use, even if it's going to be used for outdoor watering. So that helps us just know it's up to engineering standard. And we do have tank installation best practice checklist. And I brought with me today, we have a guidebook that residents can use to go through the installation and design process and feel like they're well informed when going about putting these systems in. And so the rebate is $750, which we generally find covers maybe about a third to a quarter of the cost, depending how far people go with different components in their installation, and if they go above and beyond 1,000 gallons, which we do see. So the average cost of a full installation that's qualified for our program has been about $2,300, and they're getting $750 back. Now, there are installations that are $1,200, $1,700, right? They vary, but it definitely just depends on the size of tank that you're installing and maybe your site constraints. So if you have to have more transport piping or different constraints on site may add to installation costs. But that's a bit of an overview. We do see that the uptake on this program is primarily in the rural areas, which is to be expected with different areas having more strain on their wells, lower yields in the summertime, and more space to put in such large cisterns. But we have seen 2 installations in Parksville since 2012, so not massive uptake. But what we're thinking is moving into next year with the drought that we experienced this past summer, this might kind of raise the profile for certain solutions such as this. So it'd be interesting to see if the urban residents in our region start to have more uptake on this program. It's open to Lanceville, Nanaimo, Parksville, and Qualicum Beach, as well as the rural areas. So I wanted to compare this with rain barrel programs that are offered elsewhere, for examples. So in Richmond, they have a rain barrel program, and this is duplicated in other municipalities as well. But in Richmond, what they do, the city offers discounted rain barrels for residents at a price of $30. So that's essentially saving the residents about $50 to $60. That's the unit that they do sell, and it's for purchase at the local recycle depot, so all the transactions are handled there. So that's an interesting program that's in place in Richmond. Another one closer to home in the Capital Regional District, they have a new Rainwater Rewards program, is what they call it, and they offer a rebate of 10 cents per liter up to 1,000 liters of storage. This is specifically for rain barrels. So when they have this sliding scale of storage, it's talking about if people install more than one rain barrel in series to kind of meet that minimum of 350 liters to qualify, and they'll pay up to $100, which would be up to 1,000 liters. Now, I spoke with the CRD, and they do also have a cistern rebate program, so they have both. And the idea is that this is targeted towards more of the urban dwellers, like I was saying before, more site constraints. And of course, this is a cheaper installation, so it could appeal to different demographics in that way also. So that's an interesting program that they have just started up. And so here's just a bit of the summary of what we cover. Rainwater harvesting makes sense. In our place in the world here, we get rain, that's not the problem, but it's the distribution of rain and how natural storage of that rain is changing over time with changing climate and more unpredictability in that way. And so it makes sense if we can add resilience individually at our own residence to collect that water that's falling and landing on our roofs and store it for when we need it the most, even if it's just to give an extra drink to our veggie garden, to keep the availability of water, stretch it through the dry period a little bit more, take that strain and stress off of our municipal system, and just add that resilience in times of drought. Now, the next point, it really comes down to storage. The more you can store, the better. But of course, that comes with the limitations for each individual site. And highlighted that there's different ways to help promote this sort of practice among residents. And I would open it up to any questions or comments. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Julie. One of the reasons that Julie's here tonight, before I open up the questions, is that we've got budget discussions coming up for 2016, and living through the summer that we just lived through, the Cistern program for the RDN is open to everybody. It's open to the people in Parksville also. But we may want to consider, council, to mandate staff to look at perhaps having a rain barrel rebate program. I just throw that out there for what it's worth. So thank you again, Julie. Councillor Greer.
Thanks, Julie, very much. Very interesting. I was wondering whether you had a pamphlet with all that information on, or whether you can send it to us.
that walks through the installation and design of a rainwater harvesting system. These are available at our office. I just brought one copy today, so you could be the lucky new owner of that.
Thank you.
I'll be at the office tomorrow, so I'll pick more. I'll pick some up for all of the members of council. Thank you, and staff. Any further questions from members of council? Councillor Oates and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Interesting presentation. In order to get the rebate for the cistern, I imagine there's a minimum amount you have to do?
Yeah, so through the mayor, yes. The minimum is that you have to have 1,000 imperial gallons of storage, but on top of that, through the application process, prior to being allocated funds, you need to do a pre-approval application form, which essentially you take a photograph of the site in which you're going to install your cistern, captures the roof area that you're going to be collecting off of, and then that is submitted with a description of the system that you wish to install. And our staff reviews that. It's an opportunity if there's any sort of glaring things that we would like to comment on, like, oh, that's a very steep slope you're about to install the cistern on, we can have that conversation, link them up with the best practice guidebook. If everything looks good and their description meets our requirements, then they are allocated $750 and they have 4 months to go about the installation, at which point when they're done they can submit photographs of the completed installation and the receipts for the work that's been done. So you can include receipts for any of the hardware, so the tank, the piping, any filtration. You can also include receipts for labor, so if you hired someone to come on site and do that for you, that could be applied, but the maximum is $750 altogether.
Okay, so is it can I get less than $750? Is it prorated for a smaller system? Is that what I understand?
It's not actually prorated, so $750 across the board. So $450 is specifically for a cistern. So if you spend over that, you'll get the full amount. So everyone gets that. And then the $300 of the $750 is for any of what we call the tank installation components. So let's say you did the labor yourself, and you saved some money that way, but you didn't have a receipt to submit for it, then maybe you'd get $100 less than someone who hired somebody. But generally speaking, everybody gets the full $750, no matter if they installed 1,000 imperial gallons or maybe 3,000. That's the way it works.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. I don't necessarily have a question for Julia. It's through you to our CAO. In the past, we used to have some publications and that were in the office in regards to rain barrel type use, and I'm just wondering if they're still in use. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing some nods, so.
If I may, Your Worship, yes, those are still available at the planning counter.
Okay.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Figuera. Picking up on something that was mentioned in the presentation, that the use of rain barrels and cisterns can also help slow stormwater runoff. And I was curious to know, and I know that the engineering department is working towards a stormwater report. I'm just curious to know if many or most of our residents are actually attached to the stormwater collection system, or if most people have their downspouts just draining into their own property.
Mr. Figuera.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beale. Most people are at least, even if they have a ditch out in front of their property, their drainage coming off their yards ends up at some point, if the ground gets saturated, it'll end up in that ditch. I can't really give you the statistic on what percentage of residents have a ditch in front of their house. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but at some point, whether they have a direct connection or not, when the ground gets saturated in the middle of the winter, the drainage is running off the lawns, either into a ditch or into their service connection.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. since we will be starting budget talks and everything at the end of this month, my question is, would it be prudent to ask staff to look at having a rain barrel program included, rebate program put into our budget discussions so that they can start to think about that? Perfect.
I know I intend to bring it up. We have the low flush toilet rebate program, which we've kept on, and I think that it'd be a nice addition to have the rain barrel program. I mean, 250-gallon rain barrels doesn't take up a lot of room either. I have a technical question. I was at a presentation about rain barrels, and the presenter was talking about if you've got a brand new asphalt roof, not a good idea to use rain barrels right away. If your asphalt roof is 10 or 5 or 8 years old, not a bad idea. But if it's brand spanking new, because of the chemicals, does that hold water?
Good question. I've heard that as well, and the guidance that's published within our best practices guidebook advises pretty much the same. If it's an older asphalt roof, there's less contamination risk. And this is due to the moss killers and the herbicides that's built into like a brand new asphalt roof. For outdoor watering purposes, you have to think of plant health and soil health, so that would be the concern in that way. So generally speaking, yes, we would advise through the expertise that went into the guidebook for alternate roofs if you're going to be serious about utilizing this, say, on vegetable crops and that sort of thing. But at the same time, if you're collecting that rainwater for ornamentals or grass, it just depends on the effect on soil health and plant health. But the advice in the guidebook is aluminum, slate are kind of the best. You can use asphalt roofs if they're older, and cedar shakes are not considered to be a good example of a roof conducive to rainwater. So the advice is within this book, but you're on the right track with that comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for Ms. Pisani? Well, Julie, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. We might see you again someday when we want to know more about water, and especially how we use water. Thanks again for coming. Appreciate it. So you get the book.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie, for the book.
There you go. See? You're the oldest guy anyway, so you can have the book. Thanks again, Julie. Have a safe trip home. The next item we have on the agenda, Council, is we have one piece of correspondence tonight from the Vancouver Island University Funds and Trusts from the former Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Foundation. I would define this as sort of a housekeeping issue, but I want to know if I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any questions? Any concerns? Okay, seeing none. All those in? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Oates.
I confess I know very little about the history of this, other than the sheet that's in front of me on page 11 there. And the motion that was originally passed was that it was until such time as a new governance board is in place and able to resume the governance of the reserve. And the motion tonight doesn't speak to that. It speaks to giving the money for a specific purpose to Vancouver Island University. I don't mean to be provocative, but I don't know enough about it to make an informed decision.
What basically happened is that you hit the nail on the head. It was given to us. We held the funds until the governance board was in place. That governance board is now in place, and they're asking for the funds. Okay.
That would be great, except that's not what it says. It says why are we getting down to the minutia of the cost center and what it's going to be used for? When the original motion, and I'm not trying to be problematic, I just don't know enough about it, but when the original motion was passed, it spoke to exactly the way you described it, going back to a board here. But that's not what this says is happening here. And if it says that it's going to be transferred back to a cost center, which is in place to finance human resource, research, community outreach, and promotional activities that amount Arrowsmith Bios...
That's an elaboration on what was said in the original document. Just simply an elaboration. It's more detailed. Councillor Greer, did you have a question? No. Okay. Any further questions? I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That's carried. Okay. Next, we have a report from Mr. Figuera, Foster Park Playground Speed Zone Amendment to Bylaw 1436. Mr. Figuera, if you would, please.
If I may, Your Worship, before Council is a follow-up on a resolution from Council on October 5th, 2015, to have staff revise the City Traffic Bylaw 1436 to lower the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour on portions of Sanderson Road and Pym Street fronting Foster Park. The specific resolution carried, as recorded, was that staff begin the process to prepare the necessary bylaw amendments to reduce the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour around Foster Park. Now, in order to carry out this directive, staff determined that, first of all, the playground speed zone and advisory signage policy number 817 would need to be rescinded. There's a couple of reasons. For one, it's out of date. There's some items in there that are no longer applicable with the current legislation, and it also limits staff's ability to make changes. And my interpretation of the current bylaw was it right now it allows the Director of Engineering to make a change in a school zone, which kind of speaks to safety for me. So why aren't playgrounds part of that? I think today, at the time it may have made sense, but today I think that's something that if I need to take some action, I think it would be empowering to allow me to do that. The traffic bylaw number 1436 would need to be amended as well to empower the Director of Engineering to make changes to speed zones for playgrounds. And that would take care of that piece of it. Also, speed and volume data collected for both Sanderson and Pym are also now available, and were part of the report since the last council meeting. And this data was analyzed, and the road network was also considered, which led staff to propose recommendation 4. Recommendation 4 is to support lowering speed limit on Sanderson to 30 kilometers an hour, but is to maintain the speed limit on Pym Street at 50 kilometers an hour with a safety fence along Pym Street. And the logic there was that in terms of our collectors, where possible, Pym Street is a major collector for that whole neighborhood, bringing it down to the highway. So the thought is, if we can come up with a reasonable way, and staff suggested it would be a safety fence to try to keep the speed limit at 50 on our collectors where possible. Much better in terms of even for emergency vehicle access to the neighborhood, trying to make sure that there's sufficient volume or sufficient capacity to get residents to the highway and on their way. That's kind of the logic there. Sanderson certainly makes a lot of sense to lower the speed limit, despite we can go through the data if you like, but the data does indicate on Sanderson that at both Sanderson and Pym that they're operating within the design of those types of roads. However, there were incidences of speeding, you may have seen in the report. Pym Street, there was an incredible speed of 110 in one instance. That's out of about, I think, 2,400 trips, but if I got the road right, which is certainly a crazy speed to be going down that road on, but it's certainly not the norm. And so the thought is that a safety fence would be adequate there, along with other steps in discussions with the RCMP and trying to enforce 50 kilometers an hour on that road. And Sanderson, being a local road, being the primary access to Foster Park. That's where the parking is. That's where the main entrances are. There's a treed area adjacent to Pym Street that separates the actual playground from Pym Street. Really, the access should be off of Sanderson to get to that play area. So the thought is a safety fence up Pym Street, completely blocking pedestrians from being able to access there. There's no sidewalk on Pym Street on that side. There's no real safe way to cross Pym directly to get into the park. So the idea is to put a safety fence. Pedestrians would be directed to the intersection of Sanderson and Pym, where there's a crosswalk, existing crosswalk, and then they would enter the park from Sanderson. So that's the recommendation, I think that's about it. Yeah.
Did I get a mover and a seconder? You're moving it? There's five items on there. You moving all five?
There, Mike. Mike.
Hello. Sorry, I have to get up to speed. I would like to move that we accept that we receive the report, and that that we adopt the. Oh no, hang on, that's not that one. Sorry, there are five. Recommendation 1, 2. Yes, I would like to
move all five.
Move all five, and that does include option 2. Yes, I would like to move all five.
Councillor Patterson is seconding it. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Oates. Sorry, Councillor Patterson. She's a seconder. You'll come next. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Figueroa, for a really in-depth report. I had to drive through to try and figure out some of your comments and everything. So when we're talking about fencing and that, it's so that we don't have like children that are going to run basically into the street in some of those areas, like surrounding the park area. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor Patterson, that is correct. Either children running into or out of the park. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the data, and I note that staff's recommendation is for the 30 kilometers on Sanderson and not on Pym. Yet each one of these statistics is higher on Pym Street than it is on Sanderson. I too did take the opportunity to go over there and drive around that park and look there. I don't like the idea of a safety fence. I don't think the safety directing the children to go up to another street to access the park does nothing to alleviate my concern. My concern was children crossing the street at Pym Street to access the park. At some point, they're going to have to cross Pym Street. Now, there's a crosswalk at Sanderson. There's another one at Stanhope. And just down the road from that, the road slows down to 30 kilometers an hour. There's a sign there that says you turn and it goes to 30 kilometers an hour. So the notion of slowing down to 30 kilometers an hour in that particular area is not something that I think is going to be a major hindrance or have a major impact on collector roads. Now, that's the reason why you're the engineer and I'm not. You can tell me that I'm wrong about that. But my concern, simply put, is children crossing Pym Street in the vicinity of a playground. Now, there's a crosswalk right there. I see no reason why the speed limit can't be dropped down from 30 kilometers an hour there down to the end of the park, or even a little bit further. There's two crosswalks there, actually, one there and one at Stanhope. Maybe it could be between the two of those. I don't know. That's a little further for me. I don't know if there's a minimum length that a 30-kilometer zone has to be. But the concern for me is the children crossing the street from all the neighborhoods south of Pym Street, coming up into Foster Park. They have to cross Pym Street. Somehow having a fence there does nothing. All that does is inconvenience them for access into the park. the children are still going to come and want to go to the park, so they come and so they hit the fence. If they don't get squat by a car going across the road. And then they walk up around and they come in through the other side. So I fail to see the logic in the safety fence there, and I'd like to have that reconsidered. As well, the existing fence there now, as you said, is there's some trees there, and there's a nice little rustic wooden fence there. It fits well in the neighborhood. I think putting in a safety fence, I think you're probably talking about a chain link fence. I think that institutionalizes the neighborhood, and it's not a look that we're looking for. I think that's something that should be very seriously considered when you're doing that. And as well, there was no mention of it in your verbal report, but there's a driveway there that you mentioned in your written report that's going to have to be shut down too. I don't know who owns that driveway. I don't know if the homeowner who uses that driveway would have a concern with this plan, but those are my concerns there. I think that the inconvenience to people traveling along Pym Street on what's recognized as a collector road is a cost we can incur at when we're saying we're doing it for the safety of the children. They have to come across Pym Street. I believe that in order to make it safe for them to get to the playground, that the speed limit there should be 30 kilometers an hour. Thanks.
Mr. Figuera.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates, there's what this is attempting to do, and by me saying this, I'm trying to make sure that Council has all the best information, and what comes to mind from those comments. The driveway that you see there, that's the driveway for a house that's located in the park that's being rented. It's rented out by the city to a homeowner. I had some discussions with our parks foreman on that, because I was concerned as well as of blocking that off and causing an issue. And one thing that was considered at the time was that there would be a fence, there would be a gate there. However, it would be set up the road enough where both a truck and a trailer, which this person that rents that particular house out owns, would be able to pull off the road pull off of Pym onto that access road, and then get out of their vehicle and open the fence without blocking Pym Street. So it would be set back enough so that but it'd be configured so that pedestrians couldn't get around it. That's kind of the idea with that one. So that's the driveway. One thing to consider with Pym Street, kids. Anybody that's accessing the park across Pym Street from the, I guess it would be the east side with the sidewalk, if they go directly across into the park, there is somewhat of a visibility issue to the south. Coming around if the vehicle's coming north past the park around that bend, there's a bit of a visibility issue there to consider. In allowing anyone to go across Pym Street to get directly into the park without having them cross up at Sanderson. But Sanderson is a lot more visible. It's far enough away from that bend on the south side as a consideration. Another consideration that was discussed and thought about by staff is that lowering the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour on a collector. It's all well and good to do that, but there is evidence that it's not necessarily going to affect people enough to slow them down. You can have police there periodically, but consistently to have people slow down to 30 kilometers an hour on a collector is not necessarily something that would happen. Some consideration. It is a main collector for that whole neighborhood. It's all well and good to put up a 30 kilometers an hour, but you may find that people don't follow it. Yeah, that's about all I have.
Okay, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to support the recommendations made by staff for this area, and I too have visited the area more than once. My understanding is that the fence that's proposed would be along Pym where the existing fence is, to address any concern that children might just run out there. Right now there is a fence, and I appreciate Councillor Oates' comments about the aesthetics of the fence, which are important, but obviously people could climb through the fence to go out, so it would address that concern. I was taking it to leave in place an entrance to the park at that corner at Sanderson so that it's directly in line with the crosswalk. I would suggest that there be a fence. You often see them in playgrounds where that's a staggered opening so that, again, kids can't just ride their bikes straight out. They kind of have to slow down and go around it and be more mindful of where they are. That particular crosswalk also has a built-up median, which would serve as a traffic calming measure at that point. And all along Pym Street, as Councillor Oates has mentioned, there are a number of crosswalks, and they all seem to be well signed. So it seems to me that people driving in that neighborhood should be aware that there are crosswalks. So, and in the original request that came to council was focusing on Sanderson, which is the street that has the most direct access and proximity to the actual playground. So I would like to leave it with staff at this point in time, and if in fact over time it seems that there are concerns, then perhaps we could address it then.
Councillor Powell, and then Councillor Salter and Councillor Oates. Okay, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I too support the resolution that staff has brought forward, and like Councillor Beale said, I would like to see the staggered gate so the kids that go over there. And I actually live in that neighborhood, and I've been over to that park, and where Pym is the furthest away, the street furthest away from the actual park where the kids are. There's well-marked crosswalks, there's traffic calming right there. It's well-marked, and so yeah, I think this is a good way to deal with it. The question I have through you to the Director of Engineering, so once you're designated or delegated to do this without having to come to council, are you going to do that the same for the rest of the parks where kids are actually playing and everything in the City of Parksville?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell, if Council wants me to have a look at all the other ones, all the other parks, I can do that. Putting towards it the same kind of logic, it does make sense on local roads for sure that. There should be definitely consideration to having reduced speed zones in playground zones, obviously. But there are each situation is unique. It depends on the classification of the roads in the area. It depends on the demands in the park. This one has got playground equipment in it now. Certainly that makes sense. To make those considerations, but each situation really needs to be looked at separately and recommendations brought forward. Is my recommendation.
Follow up, Councillor Powell.
And so then would that need a resolution or a motion to put forward to direct staff, or like do we need to classify the parks different, like are they kid park, are they walking trails, that thing, etc. like that, or what's the next step?
CAO.
If I may, Your Worship, I think the next item on the agenda may address it to some extent. It's setting up a policy for traffic calming throughout the city, so that may help to address your concerns.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a couple things. Number one, I do echo Councillor Oates with regard to the speed limit around the park. When we had that delegation here, they actually asked that the roads around the park had carried a high volume of traffic, and they had asked that we drop the limit to 30 kilometers. It wasn't just Sanderson, it was the roads bordering the entire park that they had requested. They had also stated that some children had been picked up by their parents when cars were coming by, and parents are running out to grab their children because of the high speeds. When we look at a 1 week, it was a 1 week recording of the speeds down there, 80 kilometers, that'll kill a person, 110. Those are outrageous speed limits around a park, any park. That's far beyond 50 kilometers, let alone 30. So I absolutely agree that we should be at 30 kilometers, not 50. The fence, I'm not sure how a fence would save a child if someone's doing 110 kilometers an hour and they fly into the park at any rate. And they also requested, this group also requested traffic calming measures such as rumble strips or speed bumps, which would be another, I think, a great addition. I recognize that does slow traffic down, and that emergency vehicles who need to get around the park are going to have to address that. But they do anyways when they go through school zones or any other zone that has speed bumps or traffic calming measures. They still have to manage that. So this isn't the beginning and end for them. They manage it. It's what they do. So in that case, I don't personally see, statistically, I don't see a bell curve going on there. I see a 1 week thing, and I think just in 1 week we saw really high speeds that are disconcerting for me, and I think really not safe for the children. And then the other piece I want to bring up is part of these recommendations are that we give the discretion to staff to decide how and when speed limits will be addressed in school zones and parks. And I don't think that we were elected to give that discretion to staff. We were elected to ensure that the community were heard and that we spoke to and discussed and debated issues that they bring to us. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we're giving this up to staff and allowing them the discretion to make those decisions. I believe that's our place here as councillors. So that's my... Thank
you. Just before I move on, Councillor Oates, you're going to have to wait. I want to give the first speakers a chance, but I just want to point out on this particular, on PIM, the mean speed is 47.02 kilometers. And when I read both reports, I read this one first and I read the second one, I can see what staff are attempting to do. We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction every time somebody says, you know, we're going too fast. I mean, mean speed is, to me, means that on average it's 47 kilometers an hour. We always had, there was one moron that was going 110 kilometers an hour. But there's a statement made here that there's no systemic speeding occurring on Pym Street. And I think that because of where we are and we're growing a bit, we're going to have to start looking at some industry standards, because we're going to have standards all over the place, and there won't be any cohesion. There won't be any. It won't make sense anymore. It's 30 kilometers over there. It's 40 over there. It's 50 over there. It's 60 over there. So just keep that in mind. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Oates. I've taken a look at it as well, and I think the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit should be enforced in that area. And I also am not in favor of the fence, and I'm certainly not in favor of starting to put fences all over town at various places where there's parks. I mean, we've come a long ways without these fences, and I don't think they're necessary. So we have a fence there now, which I think is adequate, and I certainly would be against putting another fence and spending that kind of money on it.
Councillor Oates.
Okay. So in making my decisions here, all I have is the good judgment that I think I got and the data that's in front of me. So the data that I got in front of me on these two items here, the two roads are identical. When you speak about no systemic speeding on Pym, the same statement as appears in the report for Sanderson. The only difference in the two reports is that the stats on PIM are higher. The speeds on PIM are higher, the number of cars that go through are higher. Every single stat speaks to a more dangerous situation on PIM than it does on Sanderson. The only difference in the two streets that I can see in this report is that one is designated as a collector road and one is not. Now, to the point what the people, when they came here and asked us about, I'm not a big fan of governing by petition at the best of times. But those folks, they came here and they expressed about a concern about all around the park. That's what they expressed, and that's further reinforced by a piece of correspondence we all received either earlier today or yesterday from the same people on the same issue. So there's no doubt in my mind that the only difference between the two situations are one is more dangerous and one is a collector road. And so our decision is not being made based on whether the danger level is being based on the designation of it being a collector road. That's the only difference that I see between these two streets. So I can't support option 2. I support option 1. I don't see the need putting a fence up there. The issue never was people running out to the fence. It was people coming around the park in general. What's the deal? We're going to have like a little card. You lock them in and lock them out? Is that the way it's going to be? No, that's not what I think people want. As to the traffic calming that's coming up there, if we do not lower the speed limit on Pym Street here tonight and we say you go back and you go through the traffic calming, the way I read the traffic calming thing, that's a process that would take months and months and months. By the time you went through and you did the surveys with all the residents and that, and you collected up, and you did the template, and you went back, and you came back, and you made sure that the interest groups were the right interest groups, then it's a long time. As I said the last time, I don't believe that there's a playground in this city. Blanket statement. There's not a playground in this city that has a road running by it adjacent to it the way that park is, where people can access out there, that shouldn't be at 30 kilometers an hour. Full stop. And the decision to do this should be based on the facts and the data that the staff have so efficiently and knowledgeably given us, and the facts state that Pym Street is more dangerous than Sanderson.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I do want to mention the speed versus other. I don't think this is about cars speeding. It's about what should the posted speed limit be. There are some drivers who have sped on both of those roads. I would take it that even if all of the drivers on Sanderson only went at 50 kilometers or slightly less, I would still want to see that street speed lowered to 30 kilometers per hour, as it is adjacent to the playground, and I'll use the word playground rather than park. I would actually agree with other comments that have been made here that it would be a shame perhaps to lose that fence, the rail fence, or the, whatever it is, it's a log fence along there, and perhaps that is adequate, although having a barrier on an angled bit so that people aren't likely to run out would be nice. I'm still not sure that the speed needs to be lowered on Pym, although perhaps we could compromise and go to 40, but perhaps that could be true for the whole street. I'm not going to put that motion forward. Originally, I understood that the concern came from many people who lived on Sanderson. The particular comment about a child who needed to be stopped before running out was from someone who lived on Sanderson, right across the street from the park. That is the main entrance to the playground. And at what point is the playground farther from the road? And I absolutely want to keep our children safe. I absolutely do. I also want children and all of us who are in a park to be enjoying that space. I did not get the sense that there was a concern about people running out onto Pym Road. How far away should a playground be from the edge of the park before we worry about it? I'm not sure. At this point in time, one might even think that then the community park, which has a playground, it is a park, perhaps the road along the highway should be lowered. And don't get me wrong, I would love to see many of our streets with a lower speed zone, speed limit. I think it would make it for a more pleasant place. But in the meantime, I would still like to support staff's recommendation that the speed limit be lowered on Sanderson at this point in time, not necessarily on Pym. We've got that median for traffic calming. We've got a well-marked crosswalk, and there's also a fence along there.
Okay, we're going to go around the horn one more time. Councillor Powell, Councillor Salter, and then Councillor Oates, and then we're going to come to some sort of a decision.
Thank you, Worship. And so, you know, I've listened to the comments and arguments, and so far we've got fences all over Parksville, and we got locked gates now all of a sudden. That certainly wasn't what was brought forward, and we're talking about one fence, and so I know this can be an emotional topic for some people, but let's put it into perspective. Pym Street, for starters, is a collector street. There's already a fence there. Most people that take their kids to that park drive on Sanderson. Unloading their kids is on Sanderson. It's not on Pym. There's 2 crosswalks that you can access that park. And I think I care about kids' safety too. And I've been at that park. I've never seen any incidents on Pym where a child has been at risk. Usually when the kids go to the park and have to cross Pym, they're with their parents. So I am in support of this, and I will not support any other resolution. I don't support option 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I do support option 1. I do think that we need to lower the limit around the park. It just makes sense to ensure that children that are playing in the park are kept safe. Certainly, if folks see a 30-kilometer limit, you know, maybe they'll drop it down to 50. The bottom line, I guess, for me is safety, and the bottom line is the community who live in that area and who brought this to our attention. And I know that they've been talking about this for a long time. We were finally able to hear them at our last meeting, and they requested that the 30-mile limit be set up around the whole perimeter of the park, not only on Sanderson. It's a park. There's children. I think that's sort of it. I don't see how there could be much more to it than that. Yes, there's a road that's, you know, the Sanderson Road, and then there's, you know, the road with more traffic on Pym, but it still hasn't changed that there's children playing there. We know there is, and we know there's a park there. It's not going to, I don't think, disturb the community by dropping the limit to 30. I really don't see that becoming the end of the world for anyone. I want to add that we also received a correspondence from another community member who spoke to what they were doing in Calgary, which was dropping the limits around the parks, the posted limits, to 30 kilometers an hour. That was it, full stop. And there was no, as you said, 50 here and 40 there, or whatever. It was just a blanket 30 kilometers where children are playing or at school or in the parks. And I personally think that is what we need to be doing. If it's inconvenient for us to drop down to 30 kilometers, then we can go a different route. But I absolutely support the 30 kilometers surrounding the entire park.
Okay, the lines are pretty well drawn. Have you got something new? Because I think it's time to call the vote.
I'd like to move an amendment to the motion.
All right, go ahead.
Move the amendment to contemplate option 1 instead of option 2.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is call the vote on the existing motion.
The motion to amend is in order, Mr. Mayor.
Is it? CAO, is it the motion in order to amend? Okay, so repeat that amendment, please.
I move that the motion contemplate option 1 instead of option 2.
On paragraph 4?
Yes.
On item number 4?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Salter.
And
Yes,
for all the
Mr.
reasons that have been previously stated, and the reason why I'm moving this motion is I do not want to vote against a motion that involves safety. And so I don't want to be forced to vote against a motion that involves safety. So if this motion gets defeated and you don't see the sense in dropping the speed limits to 30 kilometers everywhere, at least then I know that I've done my best to do what I think is right. And what I think is right is to not differentiate from something called a collector road and another road, and go with the interest of the people that was at heart tonight when they were here, which was to lower the speed limit around the park there so that the children would be safe. Okay. Period. So that's my motion.
If I may, Your Worship, just to clarify things, I think what Councillor Oates is proposing is that the items 1, 2, and 3 remain exactly the way they are. Number 4 be changed to that council direct staff to improve the safety for pedestrians by lowering the speed limit on Sanderson and Pym fronting Foster Park to 30 kilometers per hour, full stop, and that number 5 be dropped.
Is that your motion? Yes. All right. We have the amended motion. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor of the amended motion? Opposed? Okay, that's carried. Are we done?
Motion is amended.
Motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, traffic calming policy. Mr. Figuera, you're back.
If I may, Your Worship, before Council is a report to request Council that Council adopt the traffic calming policy 5.18 to establish a consistent standard to identify, prioritize, prepare, implement neighborhood traffic calming requests. The report offers a process tailored to the level of resources available to staff for dealing with future traffic calming requests. The process summary can be viewed on page 36 of 57, and if you turn to that, I can maybe just do a quick walk through. You'll see figure 1 there with the traffic calming process. Basically, the first 3 boxes there refer to a project initiation, and this is a process that when we get a request for service on a traffic calming issue, it allows staff to confirm what the actual problem, traffic calming problem is with the applicant. It allows us to do some preliminary screening. It also involves issuing a package of information, including a survey that the proponent would have to circulate in the neighborhood to get some signatures on. I'll just pause for a second. The idea of this, many municipalities have traffic calming policies. And in my opinion, the idea here is so that by the time it gets to council, there's 3 things. There's a clear understanding of a well-defined problem, the problem statement. There's information, data that's available for council to, similarly to we had with the last report. I was able to get some speed and volume data, and we're also able to go to ICBC, get some statistics, talk to the RCMP. It basically, by the time council gets it, there's a clear statement. There's a clear community desire that's confirmed with the survey, and there's data that speaks to the issue. The whole point is really to get the best information to council so that you guys can make a good decision, a comfortable decision. So, in continuing on with the process there, the next section says community support, receipt of survey. So that's the staff getting back the survey with the signatures, identifying that there's community support for it. Then we get into a data collection, as I was talking about. By the time it gets to a report to council, there's those 3 things in place. The community support, the data, and the actual problem is well defined. That's the whole point of the process. And then once council is able to see all those things, a decision can be made either to get it into the traffic calming program or not. And the program is basically prioritizing approved projects for traffic calming, and staff works away at it one at a time, and then ultimately the solution comes back to council. Here's the results, and so that you can make a good decision. That's the whole point of it.
So the bottom line, that it comes back to council.
In any case, for instance, there can even be a situation where we do some data collecting and it doesn't support the particular problem. And the idea would be the staff would be talking to the proponent, saying, here's the defined problem. In one case, it may be the data doesn't support it at all, and it's something that staff can't support. And then the proponent certainly has the ability at that point. We'd communicate that to them so that they understand when it comes up in council that they can appear as a delegation and give their point of view. But then council would be in a position where you have the data, you know that the community wants this, and from an engineering perspective, I can't really, in that kind of a situation, I couldn't recommend spending that kind of money without a political decision. So the idea is for them to be here to give their perspective on why they think that traffic calming needs to be there. From my perspective, I need to make sure you have the best information, and this kind of process will allow me to do that. That's
okay. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this motion? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Greer. Okay, comments on the motion. Councillor Oates, you made the motion. You're next.
I really like this. This is it's clear. It's easy to follow. On the template, when you're creating the template, I guess that would be specific to each particular instance. In particular, Vaughn, what I'm trying to nail down is how would you determine what the affected area is? So I'm guessing the affected area would be different depending on what's going on. Am I right there?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates, that's correct. Each situation is different. It depends on the road. We look at Foster Park, for instance, on Sanderson. If we were talking about lowering the speed limit, which we are, on Sanderson, if this came up and we had this policy in place, staff would look at it and would make a judgment call of how much of that neighborhood should really be involved by traffic calming issues on Sanderson. How many would be affected? So then we would create a survey, a blank survey for the proponent to go around, and we'd identify which properties would need to be consulted to put in place, whatever it is, whether it's speed bumps, whether it's reducing the speed limit. Of course, something like Pym Street, it's a collector, so obviously a larger area on Pym Street would be needed to give you enough information to be confident that the community that's affected by whatever is proposed for traffic calming is supporting it.
Thank you. The next in the order of speakers is Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Worship. To Mr. Figuera again. When we talk about in the measurement of community support, and we're looking at 2/3 of the residents or property owners. Now, is that on the responsibility of the residents and the property owners, or would that be undertaken by city staff?
Through the mayor to Councillor Patterson, that would be on the responsibility of the proponent. We would support them in that we would provide them with material. There is some comments in the process where, even the education part of it, the brochures can be handed around. We'll provide the survey, but it's basically the proponent that needs to take the initiative and work the neighborhood to get support.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just need clarification because I'm not sure that I'm getting it all straight. So on page 34, it indicates the traffic calming survey, the completed survey provided by the requester showing public support. Is that what you're talking about? Is that what you're saying?
Excuse me, can I ask what part of 34?
Traffic calming survey.
Oh, here we go. Yes, gotcha.
34?
Page 34 of 57.
So are you saying?
Traffic calming survey. So the completed survey provided by the requester showing public support. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That is what I'm talking about.
And that's what you mean by survey. You don't mean some person coming in to do some sort of survey. It's really just the proponent going around from house to house.
That is correct.
Okay, good. And then my next question here was, and then on page 39. Under 2.03 stage implementation process, I was wondering, I see it says after implementation of each stage, and you've got that down there, speed and volume data will be collected to confirm if the measures taken are having the desired effect. City staff will evaluate the data after each stage using Appendix A to determine if any further action is required. So my question is, will that information then come to council, or is that just for you folks to review and make changes or tweak, or I don't know? That's my question.
If I may, Your Worship, through Councillor Salter, the idea there is that here's a, for instance, here's a traffic calming project that's to get to this stage, it would be council would need to make a judgment call on it, would have seen the data, would have seen the community support. So by the time it's in the program, it's fairly well established. So the idea is that whatever those first steps are, whatever those first traffic calming treatments are, the idea here is the staff gets them in place, and then we monitor it to see if it's having any effect. That's why we need to have that initial monitoring step. We need to understand what's the base situation here. What are the speeds and what are the volumes of traffic going through here? Then, once we put the traffic calming in place, to make a measurement again, did it have any effect? Is it being effective or not? The idea here is to ensure that if we have to go to a fairly expensive, even major capital kind of expense, the idea is to give council the confidence that we're spending this money appropriately. We've tried everything that's reasonable to address the issue, and it just isn't happening. So now we need to get into more expensive. That's is to give council the best information, so that if you need to spend a lot of money, you're confident that we've tried everything we can. We need to spend some money here to fix this problem.
And so my last question. So if we have our traffic calming policy, does this still allows community, though, to come to council and speak to, something going on Road A, B, and C that they want to bring to us?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, absolutely. But when they do so, if they do so, and when they do so, because it's in the process, council will have all the information they need to make the appropriate call, right? If, for instance, as I was saying, if we put in place traffic calming measures, we take additional data, and it looks like it is having the desired effect, and we inform, for instance, the proponent that yes, the traffic calming measures that have been applied to date are having the desired effect, and as far as staff are concerned, it's been addressed. They still have the ability to come in as a delegation and say, we still want our whatever it is. We still want our speed bumps or something. They still have the ability to do that, but at least council have the best information, and certainly it's council's discretion what happens there, but you'll have the best information to be able to address somebody that comes in.
I think it's a very good report, and I'm especially impressed with the general principles, because they're pretty all-inclusive, and I want to congratulate staff for this piece of work. And it's better than having a knee-jerk reaction, because I know I get calls all the time, one-off, about doing this, that, or the other thing, and you need to bring some perspective to it. So thank you again. Can I have I see there's no more questions? Oh, Councillor Beale, I'm sorry. Councillor Beale.
Thank you very much. And through to Mr. Figuera, I would like to also thank you very much for the incredible detail and everything that you've put here, and thanks to staff for the work they've done here. I would like to, on page 34 of page 34, I would like to particularly applaud the objectives to reduce vehicular speeds, etc., and to especially to promote safe and pleasant environment for street users. And I think this is of benefit for residents, and also we are a tourist-based economy, and I think that's also worthy. I would also like to add, though, I think that I see this as a very good, maybe more than a first step, but a starting point, and we can see how things go. And as I discussed briefly with Mr. Figuera, it's important to have qualitative data as well when we move on. So for instance, do people feel safer on particular streets, or does it feel more pleasant, which you don't necessarily get from counting cars. But I just wanted to add that. Thanks again.
Okay, on that note, we're going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried, and that is unanimous. Thanks very much. Okay, Mrs. Weeks is not here. Oh, Mrs. Weeks is here. I'm sorry. Would you please give us the background on this issue? And thank you, Councillors Salter and Patterson, for doing this good work.
Yes, so at the September 9th council meeting, a resolution was passed to appoint a grant and aid select committee, which included myself and two councillors, Councillor Patterson and Salter. So the select committee, we reviewed the 3 submissions and recommend that $2,300 be allocated as per the council agenda.
Just for clarification, I think Ms. Weeks, you said there was 3 applicants, and those are the 3 applicants? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
I just want to make a comment on that in our grant and aid we have $2,500 and we didn't spend it all. Councillor Greer.
All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next item is a report, the retirement of the Chief Administrative Officer, Fred Manson. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Thank you. All those in favor of receiving the resignation or the retirement for Mr. Manson? Thank you. That's carried. I'm just going to say a few words, sir. I'll have a lot more to say later on at some point in time. This is it's kind of a monumental occurrence for the City of Parksville. It's a day that I was kind of hoping that I'd never see as long as I was in office. The contribution that Fred Manson has made to the City of Parksville will carry us forward for a long, long time. And those contributions are expressed in 3 general areas. First of all, we've got a great staff throughout the organization who do a great job for us and the citizens of Parksville. Secondly, and very, very importantly, over the years, Mr. Manson has been able to inculcate into us the need for an infrastructure replacement and renewal program, and we have that. We have it for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And lastly, as he leaves office, he leaves us in very, very good financial straits. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, we're probably one of the more well-off small cities in all of BC. And it's thanks in large measure for Fred Manson saying to me from time to time and others, that's a harebrained idea and it's not going to work. So, Fred, it's going to be, let me put it this way, personally speaking, I know that it's going to be a tough time. It's going to be a different world when you're not here. So, on that note, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I would also like to extend my regret that you're leaving, Mr. Manson. And I would also like to say that since I've been on council, this is my 10th year, and I remember the day I was elected and I came down here and you gave me the spiel about what my job was. And I've never forgotten that, Fred, and that has held me in good stead the whole time I've been on council, because it stopped me short and made me look at exactly what my job was. You've been there for me when I've struggled on some decisions on council. You've been there for me when I just couldn't stand it anymore. And that speaks to your strength, because I'm not the easiest person to get along with. But I will very much miss you. And I will not miss Councillor Greer when he's gone. Okay? But I will miss you.
Councillor Greer.
I would have had a lot more to say anyway, so I too would like to wish Fred the best in his retirement. Him and I have talked about it for a number of years, I think, and I'm certainly going to miss all the great conversations I had. Some we agreed on, some we didn't agree on, but they were pretty in-depth discussions at times. So I'm going to miss that, and I just wish you the best.
Okay, moving on, we have bylaws tonight. 3 readings. The Traffic Amendment Bylaw 2015, number 1436.2. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. We have a bylaw for final adoption, which is the Permissive Taxation Exemption Bylaw 2015, number 1521. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. All those in favor? Thank you very much. We're going to move on to new business, and if you'll indulge me, Council, I have a few things that I just want to bring up under new business. On November the 5th, I wish the press was still here. I guess Mrs. Tardif will be doing this in our city update. On November the 5th, the city will be hosting an open house for the Englishman River Water Service Water Project. The drop-in format will be held at the Parksville Community and Conference Center from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. This information session will provide residents the opportunity to view plans for the project and will also provide information on project funding sources in anticipation of the assent voting opportunity on November 21st. I encourage everybody at this table and all the residents to attend. On November the 5th, I know I'll be there. That's the first item I wanted to bring to your attention. The second item,
What's the time?
November the 5th, from 2 to 7. 2 in the afternoon until 7 o'clock at night. I'm sorry, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, were there specific invitations sent out to council for this event, or is this something that was just in the mail, just like every other citizen?
No, this has been planned. This has been, we decided to do it tonight. It's been planned, but the word is going out, or has been gone out to everybody, hasn't it?
Yes, and to address Councillor Oates, I believe I sent a note to council advising you of the date some time ago. Yeah.
My second item under new business, next month, I'm hoping to invite Dr. Marc Morris to talk about the doctor shortage in Oceanside. And I'm on a committee called, for some reason or other, it's called the Mayor's Breakfast Committee. Minister Stillwell is on that committee, and a number of FORA representatives are on that committee. At the present time, in Oceanside, I'll give you some of these, just a general overview. The recommended physician-patient ratio is 1 to 1,200, and that comes from the College of Family Physicians of Canada. The average Oceanside physician-patient ratio is 1 to 1,500 or 2,500. Right now, this population requires approximately 37 physicians. We have 28. 9 more are needed. And the average age of a doctor in the Oceanside is 60 years of age. So there's going to be a move made to recruit physicians for the area because the situation is getting quite serious. And in looking ahead to some sort of a prediction that if we have more than 6 physicians planning for retirement in the next 5 to 10 years, And the potential, if we don't start recruiting new physicians, is that at some point in time, 10,000 patients could be without a doctor in Oceanside. That is not good news. So I'll stay tuned. There's going to be more information coming forward on that from the committee that I've been assigned to work with. And as a matter of fact, one of the doctors, Dr. Martin and myself, are going to go to Victoria to meet with the Ministry of Health. We all met with them at UBCM, and the ADM in particular, Mr. Patterson. We're going to go and pay him a visit just to get some more information. Not for me, but for the doctors, because I don't speak, doctors speak, but he does. Lastly, I sent everybody an email, I guess about a week and a half ago, and I'll keep this very short. I feel very strongly when we started this term of office, this 4-year term. Last December, I asked the First Nations to come and give us their blessing, and I would like this council, or I would like at least to get the majority of this council support to start working, to start recognizing the First Nations and working with them. I don't have any grand plans. There's no specific agenda. There's no grandiose plans, other than to get to know the First Nations, get them to know us. They're another body of government. I'm speaking specifically about the Nanaimo First Nations and the Qualicum First Nations. They're our neighbors, and I would like to start off by working together and to have some sort of an informal relationship to start off with, and have meetings whenever they're interested in having meetings with us from time to time. I feel very strongly about that. And the other thing is that I should tell you that at the RDN, we have passed unanimously a motion at the last board meeting whereby we'll be meeting with the First Nations to talk about what we can do as an Oceanside area with regards to the Truth and Reconciliation reports that have come out, and how organizations like the RDN and ourselves might deal with some of the challenges that recommendation proposes. So briefly, I'd just like to find out from everybody, if you want to know the specifics of what we're going to do and where we're going to do it and how we're going to do it, that'll come in time. We don't have that yet, but I just want to recognize and be able to tell the First Nations that we're prepared to meet with them, and we're prepared to sit down and discuss matters of mutual interest as they come about. And I'd just like to know if my council supports that kind of initiative. So I'll quickly go around the table. It's not a motion. It's not going to be any kind of a law. It's just, I want to know, it'll be very, very informal to start off with, and we'll go from there. So I'd just like to go around the table, and people want to comment. I'll take no comment or any comment that you want to make. So anybody want to start off?
I support it.
Yes, I'd also support this.
Absolutely, I support it.
Yes, I support it. I have no problem with the mayor and council meeting with this group or any other group.
I'm a member of the Métis Nation, and we support any council having conversations with Aboriginal First Nations.
Thank you. And I support.
Councillor Salter.
So I'm not quite sure about this, so hopefully someone will assist with it. What's that? I will run it up the flagpole. When we were speaking to the recommendations with regard to staff adopting, it was on number 3, that council adopt the proposed amendments to traffic bylaw to empower the director of engineering to make changes to speed zones for playgrounds. And we all voted in agreement with that. However, I had said that I wasn't comfortable with allowing staff to make those decisions without bringing them to council first. So determining what speed limits would be going on in the city without bringing it to council first, because I felt that council had an obligation to do that work on behalf of the community. So because that was part of Councillor Beale's 5 recommendations, I would like to either move to refer or move to review that one on page 2. Well, it's on page 2, but it's also 13 to 26. Well, it's on page 2. The list is on page 2. Or you can look at page 13 to 26. It's in both places. So that one piece, which I had spoke to, but then when the vote came, it was very quick, so I waited.
Do you want to
now.
make a specific motion at this time?
I would like to request that we, on number 3, vote to either make a motion to either refer or to remove that one piece.
Yes, Councillor.
That motion has been put forward and passed,
Yeah.
so you can't
Yes, I can. I can do that in the same meeting, in fact. Well, I know that I can.
Councillor, wait a minute, okay. CAO,
Doesn't matter.
your judgment on it.
Can do it in the same meeting. Yes, I could move to reconsider.
If I may, Your Worship,
That's what I was
this
asking.
is something that Council has already debated.
As far as my understanding of it is that when I heard the Director of Engineering speak, is that this would come to Council.
What is
Decisions that had to be made, or
Well, that was traffic calming. This one was prior to the traffic calming. And this one says that we're giving the Director of Engineering the ability to determine speed limits throughout the city.
All right.
And yes, I do get to do this. It's in Robert's rules. Unless we don't use Robert's rules, I do get to do this within the same meeting.
I'm going to let the CAO be the arbiter of this one. CAO?
If it may, Your Worship, I'm not going to quibble Robert's rules one way or another. I think that Council has already addressed this. With respect to this, yes, you are delegating the authority to staff to take initiative when it is appropriate without having to come to Council. But that does not mean that the authority is totally with the Director. If an issue comes up that Council wants to address, you can still tell staff to do exactly that, as you did in that very same motion. Because although you delegated the authority to the Director, you also directed staff to put in the 30K signs on both Pym and Foster. So you are giving staff the policy directive that when appropriate, we can do these things without them coming to Council, but that does not preclude Council from continuing to direct staff.
Councillor Beal and Councillor Sultan. Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to add to a bit of clarification, because I suspect that there could be some misunderstanding here, what we've agreed to is simply the addition of playgrounds to an already existing list. The existing list allows the Director to designate portions of highway as commercial vehicle loading zones, passenger zones, bicycle paths, school zones, and now we've included playgrounds. And my understanding was that that would be an efficiency and could in fact speed up that process.
Councillor Oates.
Maybe I'll ask the question in a different way, and it might give clarity to everybody. Who has veto power over speed limits? Who makes the final decision, as long as it's within the Motor Vehicle Traffic Control Act? Do you have the ability to make a decision on a speed limit in this city that we cannot veto at this table?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates, as long as it's not in violation of any legislation.
What I understand is the ultimate decision-making body with respect to speed limits in this city is this table right here, and not staff. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, Councillor Oates. That's what I was saying we were running it up the flagpole to get clarification, and if that is bothersome, I apologize. However,
what I
need
heard
to
throughout
get
the
that.
debate was that if council doesn't want it, council doesn't approve it, or council throws it back to staff and says do something else. Okay. Anything else on our new business? Councillor Greer, new business.
No, adjourn.
Oh, no, you can't adjourn. I need a mover and a seconder to enter pursuant to Section 90.1C and D of the Community Charter. Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider items related to labor and land. Do I have a mover? Councillor Beal, Councillor Greer. Okay. We're